My name is Sheila Coleman and I'm a member of the Hillsborough Justice Campaign. My involvement in Hillsborough stems back to 1989. I was involved in an academic project which monitored the legal proceedings after Hillsborough, and it monitored all aspects of Hillsborough. My particular brief was to monitor the legal proceedings. To that end, I attended the inquests which were held in Sheffield, and really that particular legal avenue proved to be the most contentious because it was decisions made at that end of the proceedings which impacted on other reasoning around decisions made, and really one could argue it was the coroner's court which really was the biggest cover-up after the Hillsborough disaster.
What makes you say that?
What makes me say that is very clearly that the role of a coroner's court is to inquire into when, where and how the individual died. And so a coroner's court is used when there is a sudden death, a suspicious death, anything which needs an inquiry into why this person has died, an unexplained death. And that didn't happen after Hillsborough. The 95 deaths, as it was at that time, because Tony Bland was still considered alive, albeit that he was in a persistent vegetative state. Those 95 deceased were legally entitled to an inquest in their own right, each individual. What happened was, in the final run-in of the inquest, it was actually a generic inquest, and basically those people were all lumped together, and it was basically said this is how they died, and they all died the same way, and they didn't inquire in any detail into individual and the specifics of individual. And what's more, and clearly most contentious, is the fact that the coroner imposed a 3:15 cut-off, which effectively meant that there would be no inquiry into events after 3:15 on the day of the disaster. The significance of that was the time when the emergency response was at its greatest, albeit an emergency response by survivors and fellow Liverpool fans, because as we know, and it's recorded and it's there, it's video evidence of police forming a line across the halfway line, forming a cordon across the halfway line to keep fans apart. And so you had the ludicrous thing of fans trying to rescue other fans, but amidst that crowd and people within that ground, there were medical professionals who attempted to revive, resuscitate individuals and generally assist. And even their evidence was not taken into consideration because it was after 3:15 on the day. And the coroner's argument was that everyone was either dead or had sustained the injuries from which they died and were beyond a point at which they could have been saved by 3:15. And yet there is clear evidence to the contrary, that people were alive after 3:15 and certainly could have been saved. So that is really the 3:15. When people speak of the 3:15 cut-off, that is what they mean, and it has become the most contentious issue possibly in the whole Hillsborough disaster.
So when was the HJC formed?
Hillsborough Justice Campaign was formed in the late 90s, and it was formed as a response to what was perceived by some bereaved families to the inactivity of the Hillsborough Family Support Group. Families within the Family Support Group felt frustrated on a number of levels. They were frustrated that survivors were not part of that family support group. It was perceived entirely and exclusively as a family support group, and there was no role for survivors. And some bereaved families felt that survivors had crucial evidence which was vital to any attempt at finding justice, and they shouldn't be ignored, and also they should be treated with respect because they themselves were victims of the disaster.